Okay, yeah. I want to talk today about some ongoing work. This is still very much not done yet, but that has emerged from my group's blockchain and decentralized systems work in the past several years. Trying to explore a problem of what I see as a problem of a missing foundation in our entire software and platform ecosystem, and trying to explore, well, how can we fill that missing foundation? So I hope you'll find it interesting. The talk will be fairly high level. I'll only get into a few technical details, but I'm happy to, if we have time afterwards, I'm happy to get into more technical details. So what is digital personhood? What do I mean about it? It's I think even the term is not very widely known or widely recognized yet. So that's what I want to talk about. So here's a broad outline of my talk. First of all, I want to ask the question that actually has been asked or has been suggested many times: is the internet democratizing? What does the internet have to do with democracy, right? And then I want to dig deeper into this and look at self-governance foundations of different kinds of organizations. What foundations we can choose for self-governance of organizations of any type. And then a very closely related topic to that, identity. So what does identity mean as a foundation for self-governance or for democracy or democratization in an internet context? And then I want to introduce and contrast this idea of digital personhood, which is about, related to identity, but different in ways I'll try to explain. And what does this mean? How might we implement digital personhood as opposed to identity? And what are the different some of the different approaches and challenges that we have to deal with? And then finally, if we do succeed in implementing digital personhood, what is it useful for? How would it improve our software and platform ecosystem? So, and then I'll conclude. So, okay, so let's jump right in. So, looking at the big picture of the current world, we're facing a lot of very hard global problems today. So things like climate change, one of the most fundamental existential threats we currently face, but also much more immediate threats like the still not over COVID pandemic. And the definitely still, continuing problem of exploding global inequality, which adds to all kinds of other pressures and instabilities. And these are just a few that you're probably well familiar with. So I just want to propose that, kind of a pretty obvious suggestion that global problems need global solutions and global tools to solve them, right? And it seems, pretty much inconceivable that technology is not part of the solution, right? Yeah, technology sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't, but the internet, especially connectivity, is a very global thing, and it has brought these tremendous capabilities in terms of how we communicate and interact and coordinate globally. Surely the internet, and distributed and decentralized technologies has to be a part of the solution to these, as at least a useful tool that we can use to try to address some of these global problems, right? So, but I want to bring the question, is our networked computing ecosystem actually helping us to find wise solutions, useful solutions, just and fair solutions that actually represent everyone's collective interest, right? Or is it just, are we effectively somehow just finding solutions that maybe benefit the interests of a select few, while everybody else has to deal with the negative consequences, right? So let's look at, a brief history of, the last 2,000, 3,000 years or so of history. And let's look at, a few of the technologies that has transformed our world, right? So starting with, say, the internet. Well, that's, the internet is in the big picture very recent, right? And, I'm not even starting to talk about compare against the age of these, glaciers out here in the mountains, right? So, computing itself goes back only a little further, right? And on this time scale, electricity a little bit further, right? Printing, well, it goes back to, Gutenberg and so on, right? The invention of the printing press, that goes a little bit further, but, because these are all information and communication technologies. But what about the basic self-organization technology that Switzerland and many other countries are based on? Well, that goes back, more than, well over 2,000 years in its essence, in its basic ideas, right? Even if a lot has changed since then, right? So, and democracy is, the traditional way, that a population has, that we know of, that by which a population can try to make, wise decisions in everyone's interests. It often doesn't succeed, granted, right? But why doesn't it succeed? And can we make it better? In particular, is the internet a democratizing force? This term has been thrown around a lot for a long time. For decades, since the internet's development, many people, myself included, have seen the internet as carrying tremendous potential for being a democratizer. So there's this classic book on the early Usenet. I don't know if any of you actually are old enough to remember Usenet in the early days of the internet, the first big global public discussion community. But there were many books written about Usenet, and this one included a whole chapter of the computer as a democratizer, right? And this is just one in many examples. Back quite a bit more recently, but a few years ago, the Arab Spring developments also suggested, to many people optimistically, that the internet would bring in democracy's fourth wave, a new wave of digitally powered democracy, right? Of course, unfortunately, a lot of that didn't really happen, right? And especially in the last decade, and this has really come to a head as we've seen. Many of our distributed systems, our online platforms, seemingly turned, more against democracy than for it, right? Against decisions that can be even we can even have any pretense of being in the interests of the people or the world as a whole, right? So, of course, this is a big topic, right? And a very complex topic, and I'm not going to pretend to address it completely in the talk, but I want to, just briefly look at, the question, well, what exactly is democracy? If the internet were to be democratizing, what would it have to do? What principles would it have to uphold, right? And we can find, in political science and even in just the working documents, the public documents of the Council of Europe, definitions, reasonable definitions of democracy, right? So, as a kind of simple example, the Council of Europe defines democracy as having two key elements: individual autonomy, namely people get to make their own choices and get influence on decisions that affect them, and equality. Everybody gets the same voice, same vote at the ballot box, right? So Robert Dahl, a famous political scientist, in the 1970s, wrote a very famous book really analyzing democracy in detail, and he broke it down in a slightly richer set of 5 criteria that are nevertheless, if you look at it closely, very, very compatible, very much along the same lines. I won't go thoroughly into this, but includes things including effective participation, everybody being included, voting equality, again the issue of equality, and other and very other important properties, right? So let's look at the internet and its history and and its performance. Is our internet and software ecosystem democratizing by these criteria? Now, on the one hand, we can clearly see why it's suggested and where the excitement comes from, right? What did the internet do? It came and gave everybody a voice, a platform. It's no longer the fact that everybody just has to passively read newspapers or watch TV, right? It's no longer a one-way thing. Now everybody gets to speak as well. Everybody gets a two-way communication channel. Everybody gets a platform to speak as well as listen, right? Now, so that's participation is a critical one of the critical properties of democracy, but it's only one of them. As I mentioned, there are others, and another one is equality, right? So, without even going into the other 3 that Robert Dahl mentioned, let's look at equality. Is the internet, does the internet give people an equal voice, an equal participation, opportunity to participate, or any of these other properties? So I'm not going to try to answer that completely right now, but I want to dig a little deeper into that. So, and this is one of my general wishes in looking at the way we design and develop systems. I would like to see more people looking at these fundamental questions of how does our technology support people in self-organizing and trying to make wise democratic decisions, and how does it fail to do that? And in particular, there's these at least these 3 critical properties that often get overlooked or underappreciated, namely the need to give people equal participation rights, as opposed to the domination of the loudest voice or the fattest wallet, say, as well as inclusion, ensuring that our systems serve everyone. And autonomy. Are people really in control of their computers, as opposed to, say, vendors, platforms, app stores, or algorithms? Small subsets of people that that control the high priests of the technology, as opposed to the users of technology. So that's a basic theme that I like to consider, and I think we should all think about more. Now, for the rest of the talk, I'll be mostly focusing on this equality issue and how our system does or doesn't, manage to facilitate, say, online self-governance with any kind of equality property, right? So let's look at basic principles of self-governance. Now, so if we propose that we're going to use the internet or networked computing or networked discussion and coordination as a way to self-govern and solve some of our large problems, our global problems, we have to ask, well, can we build global self-governing online digital forums or communities, right? And again, we've tried this for decades. Starting with Usenet, which was super promising until it collapsed and was overridden by spam, and everybody fled to smaller, more private, more protected forums, right? And this kind of thing has repeated over and over, trying to build self-governing digital forums and failing and having them collapse and being replaced by a different flawed solution, right? So can we eventually solve this problem, and what would it take, right? And one of the key questions I want to ask, what foundations do we build on? What is the foundation? Now, any collective organization, must define at least two things. Who are the members? Like whose vote counts, whose input counts, who gets power and influence of some kind in a collective decision-making process. And the other thing is influence. How much power does each member wield in any processes? How much vote, how many votes does each person get, right? Each participant, right? Membership, and I need to emphasize, membership might be a binary property, you're a member or you're not, but that's completely separate from the equally important property of the non-binary property of how much influence you get, how much voting power you wield. And that might not even be just a single dimensional property. It might be a complex multidimensional property, depending on the organization, right? But let's look at least two very common foundations for different kinds of organizations tend to use that we're all familiar with in different forms. One I'll call the wealth-centric foundation. To put it simply, $1, one vote. The more money you have or the more money you're willing to invest in something, the more votes you get, right? And then the other is the foundation that we traditionally associate with democracy, namely one person, one vote. Each person should get one vote or an equal number of votes at any rate. Regardless of how rich or poor or what your other abilities or properties might be, right? So, and we have a lot of examples of each of these, right? So, in the wealth-centric category, corporations, you buy more stock, you get more votes in shareholder board decisions. Loyalty programs, more you invest more, you get more rewards. Online gaming, you pay more, you buy more things, you win more, you get better artifacts. Captcha solving, like you sit there and solve more captchas for more time, or invest in AI algorithms to solve captchas, you get more benefit, and so on. The same goes with basically all of the foundations for our current decentralized systems, for our permissionless decentralized systems like Bitcoin and Ethereum, things like proof of work, proof of stake, and most of these other, proof of X for most values of X. These are all, things, foundations of the form, the more you invest, the more you get out, right? Now, the other contrasting foundation, of course, again, is the person-centric approach. One person, one vote, right? Obviously, states that even pretend to be democratic are at least aspiring to this, regardless of how they might sometimes fail, right? And this usually happens within elected parliaments as well. One member, one parliamentary member, one vote in their deliberations. Same also happens with many nonprofit associations, membership clubs, committees, town hall meetings, including more experimental concepts of democracy, direct democracy, which is very well established in Switzerland, and even more technology-driven approaches to participatory democracy, like liquid democracy, which I'm also interested in as another topic, right? So somehow we have to decide these things. Who gets membership and how much influence does each member get, right? And as it turns out, as our lives and self-governance properties shift online, we again have to make these decisions. Do we want a wealth-centric model, or do we want a person-centric model, right? And the basic fact of the matter is, unfortunately, if you want a wealth-centric model, then you're set. There's a lot of answers that are reasonably solid. There's, you can create a stakeholder or organization in the real world. You can launch a proof of work or proof of stake blockchain, et cetera, right? If you want a person-centric model of self-governance, that's a lot harder. And that's why that's what I want to focus on. So if we want anything resembling democracy, including the equality principle in the online world, then it needs a foundation of some kind, right? So what foundation can we build on? And fundamentally, the foundation we're trying to achieve here is people. One person, one vote, right? The foundation somehow has to start with people and has to connect to real people in the real world. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? So digital democracy has a fundamental problem. And that's the problem is that people are fundamentally physical things, not digital things, right? We have physical bodies in the physical world. And today's digital ecosystem, today's internet and software ecosystem just doesn't really know what a person is, right? It doesn't know how to make this connection between, internet and the whole digital ecosystem and an actual person on the other side of this gap. And that's because people aren't digital, only profiles are. The internet systems, software systems don't only know people as entries in a database. So a record with some information about someone, right? About some purported person who might or might not be a real person. And often they aren't real person. Often, the quote unquote people or profiles, you find in any random internet system are often fake. And that's because profiles are cheap, discardable, and easy, and in general, easy to fake, right? Now, sometimes that actually has an upside. I'm also a privacy person. I'm a very strong fan of privacy. And, probably most of you have seen this classic New Yorker cartoon, with two dogs browsing the internet, one of them commenting, "Hey, isn't this great? On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. You can be yourself and nobody can harass you for being a dog or being whatever you are, right?" On the downside, right, are the people really people or of any kind? Are they bots? Are they just replicas of some automated process or AI, right? And because of this problem, services, our online services, our systems can't count anything one per person. You can't do a one per person quota, right? As a result, social media platforms are full of fake profiles, fake Twitter followers, which you can fairly easily and cheaply buy online if you want. A lot of the news, this contributes to problem of fake news when all these millions of fake online profiles get used to promote fake news or false claims. It also leads to fake reviews, fake manipulation of online reputation systems of all kind. Likes and follow counts, all kinds of things. And this is just a general, these are all just general aspects of what we call the Sybil attack problem. How do you distinguish real people from fake people or just fake profiles, right? And because of this problem, it turns out that actually a lot of what's on the internet is actually fake people, fake content, fake reviews. It goes on, and it all, in some ways, comes down to the fact that the internet can't distinguish between real and fake people or the actions of real and versus fake people, right? And so as a result, we've got a lot of kind of really weak partial solutions, like companies, governance turning to opaque algorithms or private oversight boards to try to govern online behavior. And these are not really great solutions because they're not actually accountable to the broader user base. They're not in any way democratic. This is what Robert Dahl would call, the political philosopher would call a guardianship system as opposed to democracy, right? So we are taking these oversight boards as our guardians. Let them figure it out, figure out online governance and make wise decisions for us, and just hope that they make these decisions in all of our interests, against basically all of the lessons of history that show that these kinds of guardians never do, make decisions in the interest of everyone, right? So, and the problem is, we'd like to think democracy is an option, but it's not even on the table. It's not even an option because the ecosystem does not have a way to implement it, right? There's a missing foundation. What is the missing foundation, right? And so, what would it take to build digital organizations that count real people, that give real votes to real people? And what properties would it have to have? I consider at least 4 critical properties. This isn't necessarily a complete list, but these 4 are definitely a minimum, I think. So it has to be inclusive, or at least as inclusive as possible among real people. Any real person should be able to participate and get influence, but not bots, right? It can't be open to bots. Otherwise, we get this dilution and this fakery problem, right? It also has to be equitable. All real people should get equal power and benefits, at least in this context, right? And it needs to be secure. It needs to be something that people can actually trust and ideally verify that it's operating correctly. And finally, it needs to protect people's rights and freedoms. People have to have privacy. This is just as essential to democracy, protecting, say, the privacy of the way you vote, who you vote for, or how you vote, is critical to actually exercising your freedom in this process. So privacy is just as fundamental a mechanism, right? So that's at the risk of over belaboring this point, to me that's one of the most fundamental problems our whole online ecosystem is facing. And so how can we solve it? Now, a lot of people might be inclined to say, well, we just need stronger identity, and this is a very commonly proposed solution. And there's a lot of talk about identity systems, and there are good things for identity systems to be useful for. I'm definitely not going to suggest that identity is useless, or self-sovereign identity, or other approaches to identity that are very interesting and exciting. But for the problems that I just talked about, I'm gonna try to convince you that identity is the wrong solution, and it's a diversion at best, right? So, is identity the missing foundation we need, right? Well, I think it's not. I think it's at best a red herring. At best, it's just the wrong tool, right? And maybe worse, it might be a siren song. It might be more focusing on identity, might be actually doing us more harm than good by directing our attention and efforts in the wrong direction, right? Because digital identities are really just more profiles. Identity in a digital realm is basically about, well, how do we distinguish people? How do we assign attributes to people? I have this degree and you don't. I have this citizenship and you don't. I have this property and you don't. I am this old, you are that old. I am male, you are female. Well, all of these properties are tools for distinguishing people. And that's what identity generally and mechanisms like self-sovereign identity and attribute verification and all these, that's what these kinds of systems tend to focus on, ways to distinguish people. But that is not what democracy or democratic self-governance or any of the one person, one vote kind of mechanisms, that's not what these mechanisms are about. They're about assuming that people are equal as a starting point, right? And allowing them to express inequality, express their differences in their actual voting and participation, right? So, letting the differences actually emerge rather than putting them as an input to the system, right? And so fundamentally, identity solves the wrong problem for these purposes. Now, let's just take a quick look at some of the ways we can approach identity and the reason. And some of the reasons they're the wrong, the wrong solution. So, for example, we could envision using our Facebook, Twitter, and other, social media identities as stronger identities for digital participation. We could use proofs of investment like CAPTCHAs or proof of work. We could use government identities like know your customer processes. We could use biometric identities. And I'll talk about all of these briefly. So let's first look at social media identities, right? So, so companies like Facebook and Twitter already invest a ton of money and technology in trying to strengthen these identities while balancing that against the need to make it easy to log in and sign up, and not their desire not to lose customers, and preferably to keep getting more customers, right? So, but because of that tension, there's they can't make these identities too strong. And even kind of keeping the fakes to the to a semi-manageable level is a very noisy, error-prone process that requires a ton of manual effort. That still doesn't produce very great results, right? So one problem is that to do all of these sophisticated algorithms and monitoring for fake, they have to have a huge view. They have to see and watch everything about not only your profiles, but all of your friends. They have to have a top-down perspective on the whole social graph. And well, technically that's not a problem. If you are the social media platform provider, well, you have all of that. So you can run your big data algorithms on it. So, but not all of us think that, especially privacy-focused people, think this is the best idea, right? So you can bring deep learning AI into this. Well, but we've seen how AI can go wrong in say exposing and reproducing the worst aspects of existing human behavior. I'm not going to get into that, but just mention that. And problem 3, if you rely on AI for fake detection, you got to account for the fact that the bad guys, the attackers, also have AI that can use AI, increasingly powerful AI, to generate increasingly convincing fake profiles that are increasingly harder to distinguish from real human profiles. And in this kind of game, AI versus AI game, just like chess and Jeopardy and and many of these other games where we've set up to be AI versus AI, well, the humans always lose in the end, right? So it eventually becomes harder for a real human to prove you're a real human than for a sophisticated AI to prove that it is a real human, right? So now we could get deeper. There are plenty of interesting research involving like analyzing trust graphs and using certain assumptions. We can try to analyze the graph structure, like assuming certain attacks, like one big attacker trying to create one big Sybil region with a lot of fake nodes, but assuming there's a small number of attack edges, well, then there are algorithms you can use to limit the attacker's power, right? But this only this whole kind of algorithm addresses only one class of attack and not others, like attack scenarios where there are a lot of people who have incentives to create just a few Sybils each, right? Just a few, get a few extra fake family members in order to claim a few additional benefits, right? There's just fundamentally no way that pure graph algorithms can distinguish these kinds of situations, because they're fundamentally indistinguishable from perfectly honest scenarios. Where honest users actually have those friends, right? So basically, there's very kind of not much we can actually do, necessarily to make social media identities stronger without compromising the things that attract them, right? Now, of course, there's other ways we can, approaches we can take. We can just try to increase the cost of getting fake identities, right? And this is what various kinds of proofs of investments do, right? So CAPTCHAs, well, that's an investment of human time. Make the humans sit there and puzzle over this obfuscated text for a while. Well, these again keep getting harder, again because the AIs keep getting better, which increasingly excludes real people and makes it not only annoying but actually exclusive, right? And it's also not at all equality, even completely fails the equality test, in that, like, even a real person can just sit there and solve more CAPTCHAs to get more quotas of whatever it's trying to trying to control, right? Same goes with proof of work. It's an investment-based contribution thing, or proof of stake, which has become popular in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. The more existing cryptocurrency you buy, you stake it, and the more rewards and voting power you're going to get, right? So it can be useful in some cases, but it completely fails if we want one. It is what we want if we want $1, one vote, but it completely fails if we want one person, one vote, right? So another approach, we could rely on the time-tested approach of government identity, right? Just show an ID card, convince somebody, the digital platform or whatever, that you are, you hold a genuine government issued ID and that it's really you and stuff. This has led to a lot of identity verification services that a lot of banks and other financial services rely on for verifying people online. They go so far, right? But they also have these problems with AI and deep fakes. They're not that secure, and they're also privacy invasive, right? Will self-sovereign identity solve this? Well, again, self-sovereign identity is mostly about being able to prove properties, prove distinctions. What am I that you are not? What do I have that you don't have, right? And those claims usually are based on classic properties on classic IDs, and so usually the basic IDs that were that are used as a basis are not actually that difficult to forge or to get forgeries of, and they are inclusion and usability problems. The IDs can be lost or stolen all the time. They exclude large classes of people, the refugees, stateless, homeless, other undocumented populations. And again, they're fundamentally in privacy invasive, right? And just the basic idea of forcing everybody to expose your identity, all of your attributes, just in order to prove you're a real person, goes against the basic principle that, well, it's actually normal and acceptable and not a bad idea for people to have different alter egos, a work personality versus a home personality, or versus the personality, the hat you wear when you're participating in a particular interest club or activity, right? So, they're not that unforgeable, and they're privacy invasive, right? And okay, so finally, let's look quickly at biometric identity, which India's Aadhaar program is tried to implement in the biggest fashion so far, with over 1 billion people already. But there's a lot of smaller scale experiments, including even a Silicon Valley startup company that got some news not too long ago called WorldCoin, that wants to invent new iris scanning technology that and put everybody's irises on the blockchain and use this to give everybody an identity, right? So, well, and I'm not going to get deep into this issue. It has some attractions. It's definitely usable. It's definitely scalable, as demonstrated by India. On the other hand, a lot of things go wrong, right? So for one thing, biometric identity requires a 1 to billions comparison. You have to, each new person that registers, you have to compare their fingerprint against all of the other billions of people who have already registered to make sure it's not a duplicate registration. This is a totally different thing than the thing your smartphone uses to authenticate you biometrically, because it requires a many orders of magnitude more sensitive division between the false positive and false negative rate. And it fundamentally requires this all-to-all comparison, which basically requires that you collect all these templates in a massive queryable database for all these comparisons, right? So it's fundamentally a lot more privacy invasive, right? So, and there's a lot of, kind of great resources on all the things that have gone wrong with Aadhaar and other biometric approaches to identity. So I'll leave it at that now, just observing that like none of the approaches to identity really seem to solve, to be, kind of viable solutions to the problem, right? So if identity is not where we're going to find a solution, because it does not solve these, does not, reliably have these properties that we need, what do we do, right? So I want to suggest that maybe the cart is pulling the horse. We're starting with the wrong thing. And in particular, maybe we should be thinking not about identity as the starting point, but personhood as a starting point, right? So let's talk about personhood, right? So what is digital personhood? I started exploring this a number of years ago when I proposed a first, potential solution to this, but it's come to be more, it's really grown a lot in the topic, especially in the past few years, as a variety of communities have been starting to get interested in this concept and different ways of achieving it. So again, the basic idea of proof of personhood is, well, we just need a way to verify that people are real people without caring who they are or what attributes you have, right? Attributes is not, attributes may be useful for some other purposes, like proving that you can go into a bar, that you're old enough to be legally able to go into a bar and buy a drink. Well, maybe that's something that you want self-sovereign ID for. But for, say, online participation, for online self-governance, it's not so much identities that you want, it's just proof of personhood, proof that you're a real person, right? And so I explored this in a number of contexts, including a draft released about a year and a half ago that has a lot more. And recently there's been a lot of other people and communities I mentioning that have been exploring this concept. And I'm going to briefly talk about an approach that I suggested over a decade ago that we're now starting to try to prototype and experiment with more systematically, called pseudonym parties. And this is just one example, one potential way to do this. It's not necessarily the right way, but it's based on one very simple observation that real people have real bodies in the real world. We're physical beings, right? Can we use our bodies? Can we make the investment of using them as a foundation to get a secure online digital personhood? Right. So, and in particular, the fact is real people have only one body each. This means that we can be in only one place at a time, right? Unless you're someone in a sci-fi story or something, right? Now, there's actually a lot of tradition for people to attend real world events to participate in self-governance problems. There's a couple cantons in Switzerland that still do this, right? Where people gather in person on a regular basis to vote, right? But pseudonym parties is trying to achieve something a little bit different. We're not necessarily trying to vote at these times. We're just trying to get a foundation for digital participation, right? So, of course, so the idea is, we're going to ask people to actually get together somewhere. Maybe, we want to distance in some cases. But we're not trying to vote necessarily or decide things immediately. Instead, we're just trying to basically tokenize people, give people a proof of personhood token, one token each, valid for some period of time, right? And they're going to have to expire because people join, people leave, people are born, people die, right? These can't be permanent, but for some period of time. We want to get a token, right? And so the basic idea, is, well, you set a synchronous deadline, by a certain time, everyone who wants a token has to be in a certain area that can be closed. at that deadline, the entrances are closed, and then people leave. People can filter out, and via some simple process, like scanning a QR code on a mobile phone app or something, they can get one token each on their way out, right? And because you can't get back in, and because the deadline is already passed, you can't get back in to get another token at least at the same event, right? You can go to the next event in a month or a quarter or whatever, but not to the same event, right? Now, a flavor of this has actually been used in election systems as well for many years in India and other countries where basically an indelible ink mark on a person's finger has been used to determine whether they voted or not, right? So this is definitely not a perfect solution. It has plenty of issues in itself, but it's not that far apart. So I would just want to point out it has various interesting precedents, right? Now there are plenty of challenges, right? It's it has a cost. You have to get off your butt and go somewhere, right? Are people going to be willing to do that? Well, and the question to that is, well, how easy can we make this? Can we make it so you don't actually have to go very far? Can we have a lot of these events concurrently? Now, as long as many events happen at once and have the same deadline, the principle, the physical security principle that you have only one body each still works. You can attend any event you want. It doesn't matter. It's your choice, whichever is most convenient. But because you have only one body, you're not going to be able to get to two events at the same time and by the deadline, right? So you'll still have only one token, right? So this means that these kind of events could be organized simultaneously around a lot of different kind of other events that people might want to be at anyway, right? Like concerts, political rallies or protests, festivals, the list goes on and on. Even in the case of refugee populations, could participate in these kinds of things. Even people who have limited mobility, well, that might not be that much of a problem as long as these kinds of events could be opened in, could be held in hospitals and wherever they need to be held, right? Even religious occasions where there's actually a very long tradition of people gathering, ceremonially for some purpose on a regular basis, right? So, there's other challenges that I don't want to get into too much, like the time zone challenge. A nice time anywhere is a pretty bad time somewhere else. There's also a variety of reasonable solutions, such as, don't have one huge global region, but maybe three or a small number of large synchronization regions, each with its own deadline, right? But then I want to briefly highlight, one of the really, maybe one of the deepest and most difficult challenges, for this as well as self-governance in digital self-governance in general, which is, well, if you've given people a token and then they use it to vote or participate in some way, how do you know it's still them? It's the right person that's still using the token, and they haven't sold it to someone else, or they haven't been coerced to use it in somebody else's interest. Now, that's another deep problem that I'm not going to get into detail in detail. I just acknowledge that it's a big problem in practice. In reality as well as in theory, that this kind of thing actually happened not long ago in the US in the case of postal voting, right? And e-voting is only still more vulnerable, right? But at least when we have a physical foundation like pseudonym parties, there's at least hope of solving this, because we can use similar solutions that are actually used in physical in-person voting. Namely, we can, for example, give each attendee a little bit of time in a privacy booth where they get not only their real tokens, but maybe a fake token or two, a decoy, which then they can sell or give to anyone trying to coerce them. And it's important that the real and decoy tokens can't be distinguished after the person leaves the booth, right? So you know in the booth which one is which, but afterwards you can't prove to anyone which is which, right? They're totally indistinguishable after that. So there's some, fun technical challenges there that we're working on, but they seem to be solvable anyway, right? So in any case, so that's just a selection of the technical challenges, and we have an ongoing project involving a number of PhD students and a lot of undergrads who've been prototyping software that's still it's getting functional, but still not not really production ready. So we hope it'll be more widely usable soon. And I could get into a lot more detail, but I won't, because I know I'm running out of time, especially. I also just wanted to acknowledge that we are absolutely not alone in this space. There's other very interesting groups working on very interesting contrasting solutions. One not far away in Zurich, developing a system called Encounter, which is also very interesting. Also uses physical meetings. And there are several other approaches that focus on purely online events, like proof of individuality or pseudonym pairs, as well as the Idena system, in which people basically challenge each other online to solve Turing test kind of things, Turing test kind of puzzles, right? So these are all interesting and worth looking into, right? So, and then there's other approaches where, say, we might be able to just rely on government identity. That's certainly a relevant approach to consider. And there's been some research, both from my group and others recently, exploring this approach, right? So and there's lots of ways we can analyze these different approaches, and a lot of them might work in some scenarios, based on the strong, the strong security, privacy, and other goals that I outlined. The only way I currently see to solve all of those problems, convincingly, is actually to have a physical world foundation and actually pay the cost of, attending physical events in some way. I just don't see any pure digital approach that doesn't fall significantly short in one of these dimensions, but I would be love to be proven wrong, all right, on this. So that's that's kind of an overview on the current space of exploration into digital personhood, right? Now, independent of just a couple minutes just to wrap up, I just want to mention, kind of, if we had this, of course, this is really hard to create, but if we had it, what all would it be useful for? Now, I motivated this with governance, online self-governance, and I totally think that's the killer app. That's what we most critically need this for. Right? Online governance online, but also to enable new, better, potentially more participatory models of democracy, like liquid democracy, right? Also and other models of democracy, like relying on sampling, getting random sample populations to discuss an issue and represent the larger population. So there's a lot of things we might want to do with this. Even just replacing CAPTCHAs, kind of giving people a way to prove that they're not a robot to sign up for an account, would actually be nicer for a lot of people who already struggle with CAPTCHAs. Or more generally, just being able to have a button, kind of like your sign up with Facebook, sign up with Twitter, sign in with Apple or whatever. But can you just sign in as a person, right? Use your token to just anonymously, create a one per person pseudonymous account anywhere you want, any participating website. Would be nice if you could just have a one-click sign in as a person, and that should be enough for abuse resistance and for all sorts of purposes. So this could enable Wikipedia to be editable again, anonymously editable again, right? It could enable news sites to bring back their comments section, which they shut down because they couldn't control the abuse. We might be able to actually make, bring these back, and all sorts of things. We could create cryptocurrencies that give everybody an opportunity to print money at an equal rate based on the monetary policy set in the cryptocurrency, right? We could do strong anonymity while keeping it accountable in various ways. So there's, again, this is just to give you a broad sense of some of the, exciting applications if we could actually build this thing, which of course is still a big problem. So just to wrap up, I just want to, I hope I know I've, skimmed over a ton of detail, but I hope I've at least whetted your interest in this topic. So just, to wrap up, I want to propose that, we need something like digital personhood in our software and platform distributed ecosystem, right? So we need a new type of social contract for the digital world. And now, it might have costs, such as in the case of pseudonym parties, maybe the cost of showing up in person to something now and then, right? That's going to depend on the specific approach to proof of personhood, but there's always going to be some cost, right? But you're going to get some rights and rewards for it, right? So, and I believe that these rewards should include the right to privacy, anonymity, and protection from anonymous abuse. Like, you can reliably block abusers, and they won't be able to just come back under a different symbol or pseudonym, right? This should include right to freedom of speech and to protection from unfair amplification of other people's speech. Right to both speak your mind and to be protected from fake news, let's say, right? Right to equal economic opportunity, say in minting cryptocurrencies, right? And a new form of, one person, one token, one stakeholder unit cryptocurrencies and things like that, right? And ultimately, right to inclusion and systems that stay decentralized, because stake is always fundamentally one per person, right? So basically, this whole talk has been about asking the question, can we make the internet truly democratizing in a way that, say, democratic philosophers would recognize as democracy? Not just a platform where everybody has a voice, but the loudest or richest voice generally wins. But can it actually ensure equality, equal opportunity, inclusion, and autonomy, these other critical properties? And I'm proposing that digital personhood is a critical element. We've got to solve it. If we want to solve this problem, then we have to solve the problem of digital personhood, one way or another, right? And it's separate from the identification problem, because it doesn't care what attributes you do or don't have in general. It's about one person, one vote, right? And identity might or might not be a tool we could use to solve digital personhood. There's arguments both ways, but it's something fundamentally different from digital identity, and we need to distinguish it and think about it separately, and think about what we want from it, and what costs we're willing to pay, and what for what rewards we might get from it, right?